Om Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Nandvaititam Gaganasadrasham Tattvama Shadilaksham Ekam Nityam Mimlamachalam Sarvadi Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tan Namami. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. We salute the leader of our souls, through whose grace our ignorance is dispelled, who is beyond good and bad, pleasure and pain, life and death, and all other pairs of opposites. We recognize that one as the only witness to the changing phenomena of this universe. May we, through that grace, go beyond darkness and illusion and realize the truth in this very life. For there shines Brahman. May Brahman protect us, sustain us, and illumine our thinking process. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Today we embark upon our further journey, our deeper dive into the Niralamba Upanisad. And this is our fourth class in that particular scripture. Revealed scripture, they're called in India, because they pretty much stick to the non-dual truth, although they may once in a while stoop a little bit or bend a little bit to not to compromise, but to borrow from the other scriptures of the world, particularly of India, which also speak of the self, the existence of the self. It's never a question, does God exist in India? It's always its own answer. God is existence. And so they at least don't have that tripping stone that we have so often in the West, where there are so many atheists and materialists and so forth, and maybe where even physical science is a kind of religion. So the belief systems in India, which go beyond belief, beyond mere belief to faith, encapsulate the truth in these revealed scriptures. And we'll be looking into further questions of the 41 or so questions that the Niralamba Upanishad poses, all with the one answer of it's all Brahman. In this case, we're going to be looking at, since we've covered 10 questions so far, and I can reorient us in the fourth class to that, we're going to be looking to the next series of a half dozen questions that cover such powerful beings as Dharma Raja, if you know who I mean, also called Yama, is the Lord of Death. So in death, it gets personified. Well, most everything does have a personification in India after the non-dual essence of it is admitted and supported and emphasized. Then you have these trickle-down principles, not only in sentient ones, but ones that are fused with consciousness, like the gods and the asuras. And we're kind of limited in contemporary religion in the West to just God and devil, but they have a whole pantheon of devilish beings and a whole pantheon of very good beings. And more like would be celestial beings, like you could call on them in Christianity. But in India, the gods and the demigods and the asuras form three different sections of existence, of embodied existence, Saguna Brahman. And that's what comes up next in this Upanishad. It's as if the Upanishad, finally, after giving out the non-dual truth, just came around to elucidating all the questions that it had run into with questing humanity or with ignorant beings. It said, well, here, I'll tell you what this all is. First of all, I need to tell you that it's Brahman, it's the self. And second of all, I'll tell you that um, uh, only Brahman really exists. So that's what we read back in slokas 3, 4, 5, when we came upon the beautiful explanation of these questions. Who is the supreme self, and what is Prakriti? Prakriti, of course, is nature, but two-sided in India, not just one-sided like we have here. It's the manifested side of nature and then seeds from which nature came, all of which exists in the great mind, the Mahat. So it all has a real good support. The only thing, because it all needs a good support, but the only thing it doesn't have a support, which is the name of this Upanishad, is Brahman itself. It doesn't need any supports. It exists free and clear on its own. That's why they say Swayam Jyoti. Jyoti means light. Swayam means as self-contained. You know, it's like it's got its own light. It doesn't have to borrow light from anywhere else. So if you look into the universe, you find out that the sun doesn't borrow light from other places. It has its own light. So they use that as a metaphor for Brahman. It exists all on its own, supportless, although the physical sun has ether for its support. But Brahman, metaphorically speaking, then you have this Brahman that exists all on its own, in its own right. And its Shakti also does the same, the Divine Mother. Both of these beings are known to be Niralambana or Niralambana. So basically, we had those questions, and I can orient us for that. Prakriti, that is nature that we're just talking about, is the power of Brahman. It's intellectual in nature because it comes from the Mahat as seeds, seed thoughts. And it's competent to create the variegated and marvelous worlds from the matrix of the word. And so Brahman will emanate forth. The first vibration of that's called Lord Brahma, and that's also called Om. We'll look at that in Rishikesh when we go to India in a couple of weeks and speak more on that subject, the great word and the great mind. So that answers the question of what is Prakriti. It's but the power of God. It's like saying at the same time, it's not God in India, because you have to keep the neti part of it in mind, because then people will make that mistake of starting calling every little thing here God. But that God, just again, if it doesn't have any supports, then it doesn't have a witness to it, right? It exists beyond witness and what's being witnessed. We'll look at that in a minute in a chart. So right after that, it says the Supreme Self is Brahman alone, being altogether different from nature and different from the body. He's about to talk about or he's already talked about who is the living being. You know, so we answered that before. The questions we've answered is what is Brahman? Who is God? Nice distinction to make. Who is the living being? What is Prakriti? And who is the Supreme Self? After that, we looked at who is Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And we can here called Rudra, and also what is Indra. So we saw all of those in the Saguna and Nirguna Brahma chart last week. And we saw how the whole pantheon is stretched out from formless reality, which has no supports, into Saguna Brahman, which has supports because it needs supports, because it's entered into the into the realm of name and form, time and space, and causation, karma. When it enters in there, then it gets restricted or limited. And at that point, it needs supports to express itself. And we talked about that last week in terms of Chirodana, basically how this self-expression is a very good thing for those who are seeking freedom and seeking to live in balance, in yogic balance. And then by seeing the expression of Brahman, they get illumined. But by others seeing the expression of Brahman, they just see Maya. And so that intelligence that he's speaking about here, even in nature, is not noticed. There's Prakriti, there's also Mahaprakriti, she who forms nature out of intelligence, out of intelligent particles, we like to say. So those were the first 10 questions. Actually, the 10th being, who is death? And first of all, if you say, what is death? Then you can just say that basically it's a transitional power that's obviously has change in it because it moves, or it moves consciousness. And then you say, who is death? And as I was saying just a few minutes back, basically they call that Dharma Raja, the king of Dharma. Everyone admires Dharma. So death is always keeping its eye out for those beings that are paying attention to the transitoriness of things. Those beings who know they're not the body, even when they're in the body. Those are rather rare. And then for the rest, he may be called Yama, it's the god of death. Yama himself says in the Tantras, by believing the world to be real, they fall into my control again and again. So this is by the millions beings fall into what we like to call nowadays the illusion of death, because our founder Lexicon coined that phrase. I have received a command from the Divine Mother of the universe that death must die because it's an illusion. So that means from the standpoint of the soul, the eternal soul, which we've just described, the Supreme Self, that death will be an illusory power that won't have any, won't exert any undue influence over them. But for the rest, and that's in a dark age like this, Kali Yuga, by the millions, they will come into under the auspice of death, and we know that's called samsara, where you give yourself to the illusion of finitude. Is another beautiful expression that Lexicon, our founder, coined. So the illusion of death and the illusion of finitude is all pointing towards, number one, a soul that's realized that, and number two, those who want to realize that as the truth, who aren't satisfied with pleasures, powers, properties, and or seeking freedom, freedom from nature, Koivalya. We were talking just yesterday at satsang and God blogs about a great word like Koivalya. And so if you've never heard of it, then someone said it to you, well, what are you talking about? What's Koivalya? And they said, well, it's really defined as isolation from nature. And then most of the percentage of the human race would be puzzled right there, be the first stumbling block. What do you mean isolation from nature? How is that possible? Because they don't believe, in a soul that was present before they were born, and they don't believe in a soul that exists after they die. So how is it possible? It's all inside of the tight-knit little box of nature, or matter, if you want to call it that. So this all of a sudden drives the mind out of that tight little box, and it starts thinking beyond the box, as they say. And now it's saying, well, there's such a thing that exists in the world called isolation from nature, like from birth, death, growth, disease, old age, and decay, the 6 transformations that take place, which are all in nature. And so that all of a sudden starts them thinking, then what is it that's beyond nature? What is beyond Prakriti? And they will go to the Adi, original, Daiva, divine, wisdom, Vidya of India, Adi, Daiva, Vidya, and find out from an Upanishad like this, what is Brahman? Who is God? What is nature? And who's the Supreme Self? I feel like I'm starting over with you on this Upanishad by asking the first 4 questions, but they're very, very powerful questions. You see, the questions in the revealed scripture are answers in themselves. If you're just looking for a question and being questioning, that can just go on forever, right? One question can lead to the next. Pretty much it's all convoluted. Snake swallowing its own tail kind of thing. no definitive answer comes. But if you take the question as coming from the premise of something that already exists, then that's an answer in itself. You can call that faith in the Bhakti Yoga path, but you call it Jnanam in the Jnana Yoga path. And some people are naturally born with it. That's why they're not atheists or non-believers. Uh, uh, so basically, if we get to this 10th question of who is death, then we've answered all those questions from the Saguna Nirguna chart from last week. Let's give the Rishi's answer first to these next series of questions. This is slokas 8 through 9, questions 6 through 20 actually, are all answered in one sloka. Brahma, Vishnu, Rudra, Indra, Yama, the god of death, the sun, the moon, that's Surya and Chandra, the gods, that's the devas, the demons, that's the asuras, men, women, animals, etc., plus what is immobile. And the Brahmanas are all that self-same spirit called Brahman. I mean, it couldn't be any clearer than that. You expect maybe the first three questions to have to do with very high-minded, non-dual answers in the Upanishads, and the ones that follow have to do with secondary teachings or things that change. And they're not denying that, but they're affirming that no matter whether it breaks into whether it remains in a formless or it breaks into a higher form, like the Trinity, or then it descends into lower forms like men, animals, women, so forth, that it all still remains the same Brahman, the same Atman, the unchanging. And that's the thread that runs through these Upanishads and through other revealed scriptures like the Brahma Sutras. It's also the thread, if you keep to the point, that runs through the Bhagavad Gita. And that's what makes a revealed scripture, basically, as compared to something that grants a concession to people who don't yet have the intelligence developed in them to keep track of that non-dual thread and call themselves that. See, what are you? I'm just a thread. See, and when the thread goes, I'm nothing. See, but I'm not one of the immobiles. See, that's one of the questions that comes up here. Who are the gods, demons, evil spirits, men, women, animals, and what is the immobile? So that's insentient matter. And that too is included in the list of everything that's Atman, Brahman. See? So you're going to have to stretch your mind to beyond the boundaries of Western thinking, for instance. Because if you were to judge Western thinking philosophically and scientifically by the philosophy of yoga and tantra and samkhya, then you're going to call everything here insentient. But they're making a distinction between beings that have senses and have thoughts compared to beings that don't, like for basically animals don't have a lot of that, and plants have none, insects have none. Then they'll make the distinction between insentient and insentient there. But if you put that all under the microscope of Samkhya Yoga, no, all of that's insentient. Only the self is sentient. Therefore, only the self is real. Everything else we're going to put into the category of the unreal because it changes. And that's the rule of thumb in Indian philosophy. So you make a pretty big jump nowadays from a materialist to a sensualist, a naturalist, a person who's following nature, to this new echelon of wisdom that enters in, that the Upanishad is trying to get us to answer for ourselves by taking everything we probably know. You might say 24 cosmic principles, how about 40, 41? Or, and go to the Varaha Upanishad, how about 90? So everything you can think of, as Gaudapada says in his commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad, all of that is just Om. See, that's all the word of Brahman. And some of it is with God, and some of it is before the beginning. Nature was there in seeds in the mind of God. Then it manifested itself, and the Word became flesh. The Word became matter, actually. And so everything here is, in that way, through the vibration of Om, is manifesting that light of that the sun usually has to itself. See, the sun shines on many other things, right? Including on saint and sinner alike. So when you say, who are the men, who are the women, if they're evil men and evil women, they too have that same Atman in it. So the Vedanta may be giving huge credence to the all-pervasiveness of consciousness. And they're even giving a further concession that say it doesn't matter inside of virtue and vice. People who have virtue and people who have vice, it doesn't hurt the Atman in them at all. See? So that's why the chant I chanted, Om Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Gyanamurtim. Everything is the form of wisdom here. Gyanamurtram. Dvandvaititam Gagana Sadrisham Tatvama Shadi Laksham. You know, Ekam Nicham Vimalamatchalam Sarvadi Sakshi Bhutam. Everything is a witness to everything here. Bhavatitam Triguna Rahitam Sadgurum Tanamami. I salute that witness in all things. And so it's a chant like that from the scriptures of India are just further credence given, further evidence given of this special ability the rishis have to see all of this as Brahman, where others are looking and seeing various things. We had that chart in the very first class about supposing everything in the world to be the Atman. People think language is the Atman, people think their children's the Atman, people think food is Atman, people think religion is Atman. And one by one, those all get sort of struck down by Gaudapada in his commentary, as saying only Atman is Atman, only Brahman is true, all the rest is nothing. Without Brahman, it's nothing. So sticking to that non-dual course then, we began to look at things that smack of Atman, you see, that really shine with the light. All right, nature shines with some light. That's why I didn't want to run past this chart when we talked about these first 20 questions. But I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but enough to say that it's not like when they give this grand concession and make this great statement, this Vedanta Dimdama, that everything is Brahman, that they're not keeping an eye on those things that change and warning us about them. So this is from the Svetashvatara Upanishad. We've seen the mighty will of Brahman, the Brahma chakra, remember that? That's also a beautiful chart. But here's another way in which Svetashvatara puts it, the mighty river of manifest Brahman. And some of us know that first chant, of course, in Sanskrit as well as in English. Yo Brahmanan Vedadati Purvam, Yo Vai Vedansham Prahinohi Tasmai, Tanha Deva Atmabhuti Prakasha, Momokshurvai, Sharanamaham Prapadye, it says. And in English it says, that one who projected consciousness, who is the bridge of immortality, ever tranquil, over the wavy and unnavigable ocean of samsara, who delivered the Vedas as a life raft, who is a purifying fire of the mantra, stationed firmly in Mayic waters. I go for refuge to that effulgent one, whose clear light turns one's understanding towards the Atman. Beautifully put by the Svetashvatara Upanishad. And so the rest of the chart takes apart these very verses and shows what's mean. We meditate on the manifest Brahman who is like a mighty river. Well, there's the river in the image, whose source is the boundless ocean. That's the mind. Manas, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. Everything comes from the mind, which is fed by 5 surging streams. That's the 5 senses: hearing, seeing, touching, tasting, and smelling, which sports 5 unpredictable currents, the 5 elements of ether, air, fire, water, and earth, which contains 5 dangerous whirlpools filled with innumerable confusion. That's the 5 subtle senses and their objects: sound, touch, color, flavor, and aroma, which is agitated by 5 great tides. That's called prana, udana, samana, vyana, and anapana, the 5 pranas, and which is attended by 5 swirling rapids, the 5-fold miseries of birth, disease, old age, decay, and death. That's it, basically. That's the rendering of how Saguna Brahman enters into everything and into Prakriti and infuses it. And Prakriti still remains something that is not only an emanation and manifestation of Brahman, but has things that are surging, things that are unpredictable, things that are agitated, things that are swirling. See, whatever words you can borrow from English to match the Sanskrit means watch out for those things. It's a mighty river of manifest Brahman. It doesn't mean that since it's all Brahman, you can plunge into it without discrimination, as so many people do. Because if you're on that river, you're either engaged in pleasure or you're engaged in drowning. So basically, or navigating the currents, you see. So it's a very beautiful metaphor which Svetasvatara uses in order to guide us. And Sri Ramakrishna has mention of that. The ignorant soul being born into the world of Prakriti is like an unfortunate man accidentally falling into the whirlpool of Vishalakshi, from which he will never return. But for an illumined soul in the world, all is Brahman. Puts it so nicely, contrasting one another. There is the Ganges, for instance. If a man touches its waters anywhere, he can declare, I have touched the Ganges. It is not necessary for him to touch the entire river from Hardwar all the way down to Gangasagar. So the master usually quipping in a beautiful way, telling us that, in a sense, all this is Brahman. You've touched it when you've touched the 5 elements. But be careful about hearing, seeing, touching, tasting, smelling, because that can make you forget about the 5 elements. You won't be able to meditate on them when you're involved in them. They're agitated. See? And don't forget about the 5 senses, how they get attached to their objects and make you forget the subtle senses. And then when you get to the subtle senses, which is basically the senses by which you view heaven, be very aware, of earth and heaven as being 2 worlds inside of consciousness. And don't forget yourself. You see, when you go to heaven, don't fall under the control of your ancestors. Don't fall under the control of the asuras. Don't fall under the control of the gods. So who is Indra? Who is the god of death? Who is the god of the sun? Who is the god of the moon? Who are the gods? Who are the demons? Who are the evil spirits? Who are men? Who are women? Who are animals? And so forth. And what is it that's immobile here, you see, that I don't want to take as my refuge on earth? See, birds have nests, foxes have holes. Son of Man has no place of refuge here. See, so it's been said in many ways. So this chart brings into focus 9 of those questions we just looked at. And there's another chart that does more of that. Let's go to it. It's actually a more pleasing chart in a way, because we get to look at it in terms of a great windmill. And I saw this picture, and with my mind thinking always about ways of charting the absolute, as I like to say. And then I thought, wow, look at all the assignments I can put on each one of those little things. So the little kid, Babaji, gets busy and, starts having fun with this puzzle. It's just an appearance. Isn't it just a watermill? Is that all it is? Or what does Ramakrishna see when he looks at it? What does Divine Mother want us to learn when she conceives of it? So you can see there, Swami Vivekananda has the same kind of mind. He says, the inherent Brahman is waking in some, while the Brahman in others is gradually becoming dormant. Those of us who are awake, we shall set the world on fire. Let those who will join us and become blessed. And those that don't come along, they can lag behind forever. Wasn't that just what the Upanishad told us? See, they're not going to wake up from that sleep of ignorance. They have to begin to make that inner eye single. Dvaita mulamaho dukam nanyatas asti besajam. Shankara says, it's the primal error of dual vision that causes you to suffer. The only thing that will remedy that is that wisdom that tells you that you are Brahman and Brahman is eternal. Only that will render the eye single again. As you fall into suffering by seeing everything with dual vision, and you're not seeing that thread of oneness that's flowing through everything that ties it all together. So that's causing you to suffer. So you hear that wisdom from a great teacher that all of this is Brahman and you are that thou art. And then that wakens you up. See? So that's what Swamiji's talking about. Let those who will join us. They will awaken up. Others are gradually becoming more and more dormant. You see, they're going to sleep in the immobile. You see, they're nursing their relationship with the immobile. That's what the immobile is, and that's what's called ignorance. And that's coming up in question 25. 24, what is true knowledge? 25, what is ignorance? We won't get there till next week, our final class on this. So you can see there, and it's an easy study, if you were to look at all the beautiful assignments that are laid out here, almost as its own list of tattvas, isn't it, that we're studying as questions, that Ishvara kind of takes the floor. That's the roof of the whole structure. That's the highest and loftiest concept that the human mind can possibly conceive of is Ishvara. That's the God of all religions. And that's stated by the Upanishads, that this is the Lord of all, Ishvara. It won't make that claim about Brahman. It'll only make that claim about Ishvara. Ishvara is the Lord of all, and every religion it appears, and you have a chosen ideal in every religion. So Brahman is breaking itself out of its unbounded limitation and expressing itself as Ishvara of different religions. That's the first form. That's the primeval form. That's the archetypical form, the firstborn, they call it. And all the avatars come out of it too. Behind that, you see the sky of Brahman, causeless and inactive. Then you can see the wheel there, what I just described from the Svetashvatara Upanishad, the cosmic wheel of generative mind, the Brahma chakra itself and the mind that's rolling along. And it's taking this water from the stream. Below that, you see, there he is, Dharmaraja, the Lord of Death, or called here the Lord of Karma. Off to the right of him, you see how the pantheon falls under Ishvara. First the devas and the gods. That's the question here is asked, who are the gods? And who is death? There's Lord of Karma is death. And then under them, the ancestors, who are men and women, and their ancestors. Under that, humankind. See, so from Ishvara to Suras and Asuras, down to the Pitris, down to the Bhutas, is how you'd say that in Sanskrit. It's a five-fold division of beings. And there they are in an order that falls out of the highest consciousness. There is a witness to all of them, which is the key piece that most beings have trouble communicating to others. That is, probably your parents, if they learned about this, would say, well, that's too hard to explain to my kids. I'll just cherish it myself. But the rishis didn't think that way. They think it's absolutely crucial that we share this with our children. In fact, probably the best way to show them that divine is in everything is to tell them about a witness of it. And today that's also the case. It's the easiest way to steer around the problems of conventional religion and to get beyond the limitations of philosophy, both Western and Eastern, is to just say Sakshi Bhutam. There's a witness to all of this. I remember when we heard that back in the 60s and 70s, that made the most sense to us. And all of a sudden we started teething on it. You see, we're cutting our teeth on it because we had read the Gita and we'd heard about Vedanta and we'd started practicing yoga, so forth and so on. But then a lot of that became rather convoluted in our minds. We didn't have really a lot of good teachers for a while to clearly explain this, like an Upanishad like this, because this is not a favored major Upanishad that got commented on by a great being like Shankara. So instead, what we got was this piece of wisdom that came to us about the witness of everything. And that's what you see here on the water tower behind, as it were. And that's the witness of all phenomena. That's why I chanted at the beginning of class, Sakshi Bhutam, Bhavatitam, Triguna Rahitam. It's beyond the gunas. And it's witnessing everything that came into being from the three gunas of nature when they broke into equilibrium, out of balance, and being started assuming forms. Why did they do that? Why didn't they just stay in a formless sense? Or why didn't they just stay with Ishvara in the highest realm, Vaikuntha or Kailash or Manidvipa is the name of the highest realm for a form for Divine Mother. No, they broke into this whole expression of Brahman. And Swamiji is saying here, the Brahman that's inherent in them is waking in some. So this day, in this dark age, we're awakening. Oh, Mother Kundalini, awaken. Oh, Mother Kuni awakens. Hope we have a great soul to help do that for us. But in the others, as is always the problem with nature, you do something good in nature, something bad always comes to it. That's why you can't make the world perfect, and you can't waken everyone all at once. That's not the nature of life here and existence here. So some are waking, but oh, gee, the rest of them are falling back into a dormant state. That is basically, spiritually speaking, some have awakened to their true nature, which is formless reality. Some are becoming attached to form, called senses and their objects. Shall we go back and see what a risk that is, you see, with the nature chart. See, all of this problem. This describes very well the negative side of the river of manifest Brahman. So it's not like you can like say, oh, this is Brahman, I'm free, then go on using the five senses to enjoy the objects and get caught in the six transformations and cycle in the wheel of birth and death and come back next life and say, I have some intuition that this is all Brahman. But I didn't realize it in my last lifetime. I only parroted it. I only said it. I have to really drive this deep into my consciousness so that Kundalini Mother power will awaken in me and express herself fully through me and use me as her vehicle. And then it's not a matter of forgetting or remembering anymore. It's the I am of India. Sarvosmi, all this is. It's all Brahman. And I can't remember or forget it anymore. I'm living in a land where the sun of wisdom never rises and never sets, as Ramprasad sings in one of his. The sun of her wisdom never rises and never sets. I feel like I've been awake for countless aeons. It's so beautiful a way a realized soul will express this, either through an Upanishad or through a great song or poem like that. Well, there, you might say, looking back on that chart again, is all of that mighty river of Brahman that has its risks in it, its currents and its eddies and its depths and its drowning, and it all gets focused in this chart right here. Basically, you can see that Sanchita karma is past deeds and karmas that are flowing through the mill all the time. You see, and back there behind, you can see the gateway to the three worlds. Into the three worlds comes about due to these three karmas. And beyond that, you can see leaves and limbs of past lifetimes. You see what fun I had with this when every little thing had an assignment in perfect order in a simple piece of art like this. So because of the unresolved karma of limbs and leaves of past lifetimes, then they flow back through this wheel, you see, the Kala Chakra wheel, and they become different beings, and they flow with the waters of their own karma. And then that's Sanchita karma. And then they have to experience the effects of that karma in the lake of the world, in the sea of the world's called. That's called prarabdha karma, or accumulative effects. And over here in a little corner, agami karma. So you're probably, those of you who have taken teachings from me for 20 or 30 years are probably saying, well, you've always taught about the three or sometimes four types of karma. There's sanchita, there's prarabdha. I mean, because this wakens people up to, again, if you hear Kaivalya, you find out for the first time there's such a thing as getting beyond nature. You never thought that before. Now, if you hear the teachings of karma, even the word karma, you should then get from your teacher the three kinds of karma that's taught in the Ramayana and it's taught in the Bhagavad Gita by Krishna and Ram way back in India's history. Just by knowing that there's three kinds of karmas, then you can start to figure out why you're being born in the body, how you came here. So the questions of how, why, what, when are all answered. You could take all of these 40 questions of this Upanishad and just put them into 5, right? Or 4, what, where, when, and why. And the 5th W is who. So that's what the witness is all about, you see. The witness is on a pedestal up here, looking down on all this. I'll show you that in a second. The quote here then is we've gone through agami karma, by the way, is the future effects that you're going to have to experience because of doing actions that you took out of past actions, sanchita to prarabdha. And if you don't take that sanchita that you brought into life with you and neutralize it, then you'll be doing actions. And I wish I could jump there right away, but it says here, what is a deed and what is a non-deed? That's question 23 and 24. That has all to do with karma. And the rishi here gives a very beautiful answer to it, to what is a deed and what's a non-deed. But actually, he works it into what is bondage and what is liberation. So keep that in mind. We're going to be looking at this, what is a deed, because in this way, everyone has prarabdha karma, even even the great beings have to hold on to some karma to get back here. They're doing it on purpose so that they can come back. That's called a bodhisattva in Buddhism. It's called a jivan mukta in Hinduism or in Vedantic or Vedic culture. So they're holding on to some of that prabha karma on purpose so that they can have a way to get back into the body. They're from the realm of where name and form are manufactured, you see, like Swami Turiyananda. Sri Ramakrishna said, Turiyananda, when he was passing, he said victory to Sri Ramakrishna and he chanted slokas. And then he closed his eyes and just passed out of the body like that. So Sri Ramakrishna said about him, he's from the realm of where name and form are manufactured. You see, it's the nameless, formless. So you have to manufacture them and a body along with it to come into the realm of the mighty river of the manifest Brahman, or come down the windmill, you see, the watermill of Saguna Brahman. And questions that come up after that, what is a deed and what is a non-deed, which has to do with karma, is in what is pleasure, what is pain, what is heaven, and what is hell. And we'll look at those next week, probably. And then after that, the big finale is what is bondage and what is liberation. Since we're here on karmas, real quickly, let me read you the Rishi's answer to it. Jump ahead a few questions and let me read you the answers to karma. I do deeds that are done through sense organs. The deed thus done as centered in the self is the deed in question. So if you say, and he's got this in quote, if I do deeds done through the sense organs, the deed thus done is centered in the self alone, that's the deed. That's what a deed is. So a non-deed is something that you're going to have to suffer. The deed done with conceit as agent and enjoyer, which causes birth, which binds, is the deed that accumulates. And he goes on to say, the non-deed is the obligatory and occasional action, like sacrifices, vows, austerities, and gifts, done without desire for their fruit. So the deed that's karma bound is done with desire for fruits. Everyone's doing that. I want this, I want that. I'll work for this. I'll get my money. I'll buy that. And I'll have a family. I'll get a house. I'll get property. And it's all with, I want that, you see. So that's the agent he's talking about here. It's done through the sense organs, and it's not centered in the self. But the non-deed is done centered in the self. See? Because he has realized that none of this is real, then why should he want it? You see? So he'll act. And we had this talk about this at Satsang and God Blogs yesterday. Talked about karma and how deeds done with the idea of agency in them and self-will, individual self-will causes suffering and limitation, and how those beings are able to skirt that and do action without desire for the fruits. That's, of course, an old teaching from the Bhagavad Gita. So this is what he says about deeds. We might repeat it next week a little bit. But as we were talking here, there's one more quote by Swami Vivekananda. Have and hold oneness of vision. Learn to avoid the traps which one is heir to by one's very birth. You see, by one's very birth, those leaves, one's heir to these certain karmas. So avoid the traps which one is heir to by one's very birth. Never again get stuck in self-imposed bondage. A really beautiful 2 sentences quickly on the subject by Swami Vivekananda. So you're to burn away that karma. So that can even be sung about. Niskarma karma dahano jvalano bhavami nirdukkha dukkha dahano jvalano bhavami nirdukkha deha dahino gagano namoni Gyanamritam samarasam gagano pamoham nishpapa papa dahano ihita shantaham nirdharma dharma dahano ihucha shanoham nirbandha bandha dahano Ihuta shanoham Gyanamritam samarasam gagano pamoham Nirbhava bhava varahita bhavahi katsa Niryoga yoga rahito nabhavami Nirshota chitta rahito nabhavami vatsa Gyanamritam samarasam gagano pamoham Gyanamritam samarasam gagano pamoham. The Advaitic says very poignantly here about this extermination of karma that can go on in this very lifetime. He says, I'm the fire of living intelligence that consumes the activities of the actionless Atman. I am the fire of non-dual wisdom that removes the sorrows of the sorrowless Atman. I am the non-dual wisdom that dissolves all the bodies of the bodiless Atman. I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky and infinite like space. I am the fire of non-dual wisdom that eradicates the sins of the sinless Atman. I am the fire of non-dual wisdom that renders extinct the attributes of the attributeless Atman. I am the fire of non-dual wisdom that strikes off the bonds of the unbound Atman. I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. O precious one, I am neither distinct from reality nor brought into union with it. I am not invested with a mind, nor am I devoid of a mind. Don't you see? Thought belongs to me, and I am free of it as well. For I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. Gyanamritam samarasam gagano pamoham. Just one of the 40 verses the Advaitic sings. Kind of funny, isn't it, that you have 40 questions here and then you get 40 verses from the Advaitic, which pertain very much directly to them. So the windmill chart is one way in which we can bring all of this, particularly these 10 questions into focus better. And then another one that I was promising to show you has to do with, oh yes, the witness here. There's that Sakshi Chaitanya that we were talking about that's mentioned. And there is the elevated soul who has worked his way up out of the lower mind and through the heavens, from earth to heaven, through all those realms and worlds. And Kundalini has awakened and has brought that soul to a station of witness consciousness, Sakshi Bhutam. Lord Vashishta says about that soul, the witness sacrifices and takes on the appearance of the jiva with its power to engage in limited consciousness. In this truncated awareness, dream after dream is engaged in, the experience of which amass and ignite a whole series of existences, which we just looked at here. They're all lived under the false assumption that the physical universe and the various worlds are actually real. But when he begins to take on witness consciousness, he looks all out of them, all, number one, as being unreal, and number two, as being inside of himself. First thing that is to be said about witness consciousness is it's not the highest state. It's pure conscious awareness that lies behind it. So it's who has an alambana, isn't it? It's an alambana. It's a station of consciousness. It's very high, but it's still as a support that it looks deep inward and bases itself upon. And then after that, the next thing that would be seen is this matrix. It was called knower of the word. The witness, Sakshi, would become knower of the word in its various processes. And such things as higher comprehension of tattvas would be there. The dynamics of higher perception. And I won't go through all of them with you now, but they're called spandas. Then after that, the 24 cosmic principles began to come into view. That is, basically, if you're looking out from Brahman as a witness consciousness on everything out here, then you see basically some of these questions that we just got answered. The first one is communion with the deities, right? What were the deities? Well, everything from Brahma to Vishnu to Rudra to Indra to Yama, the god of death, to the god of the sun and moon, the gods themselves, the asuras, and men and women, animals, so forth. They all are seen by the witness consciousness from inside the self out into, you might say, the realm of the non-self, if you're being very specific about the distinction between consciousness and nature, or between spirit and matter. So this is a lot to see. This is, if you're coming from the condition of dormancy, as we borrow that word from Swami Vivekananda, and you're looking inward, you want to awaken the Kundalini, awaken the chakras, and invest consciousness with everything, realize the Divine Mother, and ride that inward toward the highest station, then this is what you'll be transcending, and this is what you'll be aiming for. Witness consciousness and the word being also called Mahat, the mind, the great mind, is be what would be the highest of all alambanas. It's like in Samkhya Yoga, the Mahat would be the finest of all the alambanas that you meditate upon. If you remember Lord Kapula's 24 cosmic principles, Mahat is high on the list, subtlest. Other principles that are held within these higher perception would be time and space, not just as we see them on the physical realm, but their inception, how the great mind thinks of things in time and space. So those are thoughts like everything else, but they're great thoughts because everything will have to have a place to go and a support for it. So it's no different with the cosmic principles. Time and space will also be manifested by the great mind, and beings will see it inside of themselves, and they'll go to it and assume bodies in it. Some of these are, bodies are going on over long cycles of time, and some of them are getting dissolved in pralaya, and in mahapralaya, all of them are getting dissolved, and then some of them will come back again. So this is all a matter of those three gods, Kala and Desha and Yama, god of death, time, space, and life and death. All of those are great thoughts in the great mind, and the witnesses seeing them all now from being different from them. You see, that has to be accented again and again. Like Krishna seeing the word Om. When I saw the word, I saw the worlds in space and time. We're coming out of it and going back into it. But since I was seeing that as a process and saw that I was different from it, I saw that no time was passing. So he was in a timeless place when he saw the worlds getting manifested and dissolved due to the auspice of who? Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So the Trinity could just as easily be put there, you see. In fact, that's what you might say is part of the highest level of communion with the deities. Some beings worship Vishnu, some beings worship Shiva. When people get into Indian philosophy, one of the first questions they go deep enough is, why can't you worship Lord Brahma? Because nobody's ever worshiping Lord Brahma. You go to India, temples everywhere for Lord Vishnu and Lord Shiva. Only maybe one or two to Lord Brahma in the whole subcontinent. So this firstborn soul is pretty rare to get a vision of. And probably there's just nobody there to worship him when things start. Nobody's woken up yet, see. It's like you don't see your father, when you're asleep. When you first wake up, one of your first thoughts would be, where's dad? You see. So all of this has to be seen in terms of time and space and changes. Here's the next level be the controller of name and form. The witness will see that. Probably it's the same one who removes appearances to things. So you're talking about the Divine Mother who wakes us up from illusion and delusion, which is why I just chanted that. We salute that eternal being who is through whose grace our ignorance is dispelled. Talking about Brahman and its Shakti. The guardian of souls comes into being. You could say, Dharma Raja there again if you want. It could be Ishvara, master of life and death, and the destroyer of death would be that guardian of souls. So by that time, you're down on the plateaus of consciousness, in the valleys of consciousness, you might see. The plateaus would be more like dream state, and the valleys would be more like waking state. And there you see the witness is also looking on upon all of this and seeing the 24 tattvas, the lower perceptions. The higher perception was here with the spandas, and then Lord Kapil's 24 cosmic principles here are the whole Adidaiva Vidya, where people usually hear about these first in Samkhya Yoga. Then later on, they'll hear about the higher levels of perception, and that will lead them on out of time and space, for instance. And then, of course, the adept holder of prana, the god of prana, we might say, is there, and the witness consciousness is also overlooking that. And then the protector of the three worlds. All of that is under the purview of the witness consciousness. So this is quite a fun and complete chart to look at in terms of these series of questions that we're trying to clarify. At the same time, seeing it all as Brahman. That's what the witness consciousness will have an advantage to all other beings, is that because he got up and out of the process, now he can see it all as a process, and he can see himself as transcendent the process, and also that within all processes are going on, like waking, dreaming, and deep sleep are all going on in you. Lord Vashishta goes on because he's like one of the great authorities on witness consciousness. So this chart is contained between two great teachings in Yoga Vashishta. When you attain witness consciousness, the process of how the body-mind complex becomes attached to the realm of matter, consisting of the five elements, will be seen clearly. Go again, one of those things you want to really attain. Witness consciousness. You should meditate on witness consciousness. If you're meditating on a Mahat, you're pretty much doing that. Detached, you will then know yourself as the mere onlooker of such imaginary processes, all those sankalpas. In amazement, you will wonder why the ever-free Atman ever wanted to wrap itself in the sheaths of nature, like a worm spinning itself within a many-layered chrysalis. Oh, it is also perplexing. And of course, this is Lord Vashishta talking to the young teenage Ramchandra and teaching him about witness consciousness, because Ram has heard of it from a very early age. And speaking of ages, he was in the second age. He was the avatar of the second age after Satya Yuga. So Dwapara Yuga, he was the avatar of that. And then Treta Yuga came Krishna. And then in this Yuga, well, we have Sri Ramakrishna, for instance, Kali Yuga. So this is another look at a chart that pretty much answers many of these questions. Let's read now, as we end our class, come towards the end, the Rishi's own answers. Now that we've availed ourselves of a lot of things to think about under the auspice of these great questions. Again, Brahma, Vishnu, Indra, and the god of death, the sun, the moon, the gods, the demons, men, women, animals, and what is immobile, as well as the Brahmanas, are that very spirit. They are that same Atman which he was describing in the sloka before that, by saying the Supreme Self is Brahman, alone, being altogether different from nature and body. So now all of these things that he just described to us have bodies, right? Some of them very causal bodies, some of them subtle bodies, some of them gross bodies, like animals and men and so forth. And so in one fell swoop, he answers those questions pretty much 6 through 20 with those two slokas. And next come the deeds, the karmas, which we already gave an advanced look at. We'll just continue next week with a class that will probably start a little bit with karma, and we'll go deeper into these questions. We'll also look at bondage and ignorance, which, unlike these other questions, the Rishi has a lot to say about. It didn't have a lot to say about these earlier things, but let me count them here. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11 um, slokas on bondage. And then one uh, one long sloka about liberation. So bondage takes up a lot of what he's going to say to us next week. With the time left, which is, we still have time then to look at death. Because I did bring one chart in case we had the time for it that had to do with prana and death. Now we saw prana here, the adept holder of prana. So Dharma Raja would be that. I mean, basically, Divine Mother is also known for that, but she's also known more for the psychic prana and the Shakti, it's called. So we can make it the gross pranas, which we looked at in the one of the previous charts, are 5. Remember, the mighty manifest river of Brahman had those 5 pranas in it as these tide pools, these whirlpools that people can get stuck in. So from gross prana then up to refined prana, up to psychic prana, up to Shakti, is a sort of inward map in which the soul steps in to realize subtler and subtle levels of energy, what we call energy out here today. Now, we've, with this class, answered 6 through 20. So next week we'll spend most time on what is bondage and what is freedom. And also we'll have to end the class next week with who is the sage? And that's the luminary. And what is the austerity that frees the soul, done under the tutelage of the sage? Where is the supreme abode? And what is to be sought after? Those are questions that Shankara answered too, when he was asked him, what is to be sought after and what's to be rejected? So that's question 41. So I've taken you all the way through the 40 of them. But to end this class, then let's fill out these 6 through 20 by looking at this chart on death, which, as we talked about before class today, is given names like Dharma Raja, the king of Dharma, and Yama. Let's see. So, prana and the illusion of death. That is, I've said before that the ancestors are very attached or addicted to prana. It's the life force, basically. So it makes our food taste good. It causes us to breathe, feel like we're alive. It powers our thoughts in terms of psychic prana. So there are lots of levels of prana that we live by, but that's one of the finer meanings for man does not live by bread alone, is that he lives by prana. So the Taittiriya Upanishad says here, prana is the life duration of the animate world. On that ground, it is regarded as sarvayusham, universal life. Sarvayusham. Those who contemplate prana as Brahman attain the full span of life. The soul becomes fearless only when it obtains that secure ground. If it assumes the slightest interval of separation from that identity, then comes fear, and then comes death. So we're talking about death as being an illusion. You see that death doesn't really occur to most minds who are illumined. They're thinking time and space and death, and what we looked at this chart about the witness, since they're already occupying the atmosphere of witness consciousness. And those questions don't come up um, for those kinds of beings. But Upanishad definitely wants to give a concession in that way for those who do think about that. They still have doubt and fear, for instance, that dies hard. Taittiriya Upanishad is one of the greatest Upanishads to find out about prana because it's just not described very well in and not included in many of the cosmological lists of philosophy and in India. And since the chart already talked about these five kinds, prana, apana, vyana, udana, and samana, we can talk about them just with the lungs. We're talking about breathing in, holding, breathing out. Uh, uh, so that's one way in which prana gets taught because it can't be seen. It can only be intimated by the three movements of your breath. Here, you see the prana is connected to Lord Yama. Uh, and he's the being that's taking souls back and forth, you see, between a multidimensional movement. So these are here are the asuric beings, and over on the other side you see the suras. So that's gods and demigods, basically. So that's the question here. Who are the gods? Who are the demons? Which is question 13 and 14 in this Upanishad. So here we find out that the demigods or the asuras here are taking birth and being subject to birth, life, and death. You can see those three here under Yama's domain. And so it's a multidimensional movement. That's why you'll find some very powerful evil beings here on Earth. You also find some very positive um, beings that are suras that take birth on Earth and do good things to the world. So that's explained by these two kinds of beings whom these questions focus upon. The quotes are good, help clarify. Swami Vivekananda said, all expansion is life, all contraction is death. All love is expansion, all selfishness is contraction. Love is therefore the law of life. He who loves lives. He who is selfish is dying. Therefore, love for love's sake, because it is the only law of life. Just as you breathe to live. This is the secret of selfless love, selfless action, and the rest. Put in the usual illuminating way that Vivekananda always explains things. Now, I mentioned there were actually quotes from the god of death himself, Lord Yama, and this one is made famous and comes out of the Katha Upanishad. You remember Katha Upanishad? Nachiketa goes to find death because his father has given him to death. So he goes to look for death and finds death not home, but Mrs. Death is home. So he goes into her home and waits for Dharmaraja to come back. And then Dharmaraja grants him 3 boons for having to wait. You don't keep a guest waiting in India. And because of those 3 questions, then the third one is, I want to know what's beyond death. And Yama doesn't want to grant that. Nobody can know that while they're in the body. It's just not done. But Yama proves himself to be worthy of knowledge of that. And so the Lord of Death begins to tell him from chapter 2 on, because chapter 1 is taken up with the meeting. And then the next, I think, 2, 3 chapters are all about what Yama tells Nachiketas about what is after death. So this quote is one of the things he tells them. To the careless soul fooled by wealth and pleasure, the path of the hereafter never occurs. Those who think quote, "This is the only world," unquote, "fall into my control again and again." So I was trying to explain that earlier in this class. And this weekend, we were also talking about that in terms of Koivalya. If you hear a word that bespeaks of something beyond bondage and beyond, that helps isolate you from nature, where birth and death and life take place in nature, then all of a sudden you know that there's something beyond. And in this case, Yama is describing those who don't know that there's something beyond matter. They're fooled by wealth, pleasure, and the path of the hereafter, Koivalya, never occurs to them. So they're going around in this wheel of samsara, as Lord Buddha called it, the Kala Chakra. And they're under the control of death, not only just that lifetime, but again and again. So that's being reborn many times inside different forms, which would, in some of the Indian philosophies, would include trees, insects, animals, and of course human beings. Human beings, of course, fall in a huge spectrum. As we're saying here, so do the gods and goddesses, the gods and asuras and the suras. All are a different admixture of the demoniacal and the divine, as Sri Krishna calls it in the Gita. So that's a good time to bring our class to an end. So let's end here then with a chant. Jananim Sharadam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Pado Padme Toye Shritva Pranamami Mahor Mahor Om Shanti 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 Hari Om. O Sharda, Goddess Divine, O Ramakrishna, Teacher of all, in bosom holding those lotus feet, salutations to both, ever be of mine. Om. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat.